What on earth is God doing?
Why have things happened the way they have in the past?
Why is the world the way it is today?
Where are things going in the future?
What is God's plan and purpose for Israel?
Hello, I'm Pastor Bill Britton here at Trinity Church in Alma, Michigan. And it's our privilege and blessing to present to you these messages from Dr. Renald Showers. Dr. Showers is a renowned Bible scholar, researcher, and teacher, and he likes to be referred to as simply Renny. I know you'll find the information that Renny shares to be inspirational and informative. In a time when many people are asking questions like, where in the world are things going? And why are things the way that they are? This series of messages is an excellent reminder of God's sovereign hand in history past, up to our present, and His sovereign work into the future. Our hope is that this overview of the Scriptures will bring you confidence and assurance in God. So sit back and enjoy these messages by our friend and teacher, Dr. Renny Showers.
During our first session this evening, we want to look at the contemporary scene of why things are the way they are, just going back like to the middle of the 20th century, now spilling over to our 21st century. But then in our second session, we're going to start getting into what the Bible teaches about the future is going to take place. And a couple of our books back there on the book table relate to that. One is a commentary on the prophetic book of Daniel in the Old Testament entitled The Most High God. A number of years ago, there's a man that startled me, and he said, I bought that book, and he said, it's the most expensive book I've ever bought in all my life. I thought, well, it's only about $10 or $11. I said, what did you pay for it? $600. $600? I said, how in the world did that happen? Well, he was a test pilot for Bell Aircraft in their helicopters, etc. But he was a believer, and his home church had assigned him a Sunday school class of adults to teach the book of Daniel. He'd never studied the book of Daniel on his own. And he waited to the Friday before he was supposed to start teaching it on Sunday. And he was panicking. I never even opened the book of Daniel before. I don't know what to tell him. And there was a Christian ministry down in Texas near where he was working and everything, and he called him on the phone. He said, I'm desperate. He said, do you have any good book that will help me understand the book of Daniel? And they said, yeah, we have one here entitled The Most High God. And he said, well, I've got to get it right away. Well, come over. We have them right here. He said, well, do you have an open helicopter pad that I could land on? No, we don't, but we have a big open lawn beside us and everything big enough. He said, I'll be right over. So he went over and he purchased it from them and got it and everything. But the reason it was $600, he was allowed to rent a helicopter for personal purposes. $600 an hour to do that. And so it's the most expensive book I've ever paid for in all my life, and I couldn't believe it. But we go through this book. Many Bible scholars believe that the book of Daniel is kind of the keystone or foundation for all the other prophetic books in the whole Bible. And that if you don't have a good handle on Daniel, you're going to have trouble understanding a lot of things in the book of Revelation. And Jesus' Olivet Discourse, starting in Matthew 24, is based a lot on things that are in the book of Daniel. And so it's a good basis to get hold of. There's another book back there entitled There Really Is a Difference. And this explains the differences between covenant theology, dispensational theology, and the different views of the millennium, premillennialism, amillennialism, and postmillennialism. Maybe some of those terms are foreign to you, but we explain in this book what all of them are referring to, and we show the distinctions between covenant theology, dispensational theology, and the different millennial views. We explain what they believe and teach. We explain how they got started historically during the history of the church. And it's very important for you to understand this because even within Bible-believing circles, there is strong disagreement between covenant theology and dispensational theology. And I know that dispensational theology and premillennialism is the view that is held to by this church. It's a view that I personally am convinced of, and I've taught them and everything for a good number of years. But it does make a big difference, because your covenant theology people overwhelmingly say God's done with Israel. And God has no present or future plan for the nation of Israel whatsoever, and he's replaced it with the church. And as we have already seen, that began to change the whole structure of the church and what they believe and teach, and even was one of the key roles in developing kind of toward the Roman Catholicism and all the rest. And so we explain all these in very easy to understand language so that you can get the distinctions. And maybe if you're listening to preachers on the radio or television, be able to discern, where is this one coming from? Where's this person coming from? What does he hold to? And all the rest. So it does deal with some very critical issues along these lines. Now, last evening, we brought our study up to our present, actually the 20th century, and now our 21st century. And we want to deal now with some of the results of liberal theology and neo-Orthodox theology. And we saw last evening how between the two of them, they rejected all forms of revelation from God to man. General revelation, where God has revealed truth to all mankind in general through the universe he's created, etc. And then like special revelation, which would include the Bible, miracles. Special revelation is revelation God's given that not all human beings have been exposed to. Again, there's still many people around the world today who have never even seen even one verse of the Bible. And how many human beings today have actually witnessed a legitimate miracle and all the rest? But between these two perverted forms, liberal theology and neo-Orthodox theology, together they were able to reject all forms of revelation of truth that God has given to mankind. And by doing that, they have removed the whole foundation for knowing if there is even a true and a living God whatsoever. And that's what Satan was after. And I would point out to you that starting probably basically around the middle of the 20th century, coming up now in our 21st century, Satan's great strategy in the world is that of a growing denial of the existence of the personal sovereign creator God of the Bible. And there have been different expressions of that over the years. Let me just give a little bit of background here. One of the key things that has led to this growing denial of the existence of the personal sovereign creator God of the Bible has been Darwinian evolution. Darwinian evolution. I'm just going to read 2 or 3 statements here. There's a professor at Cornell University is sold out lock, stock, and barrel to Darwinian evolution and totally denies the existence of a personal God. And his name is William Provine, Cornell University. Listen to one of his statements, quote, "Evolution is the greatest engine of atheism. It's the greatest engine of atheism that has ever been invented." He goes on to say that Darwinianism tells us there's no detectable God or designing force in the universe, no purpose in life, no life after death, no foundation for ethics, and no free will. That Darwinian evolution has brought us to that conclusion of all these things. And really, there's no ultimate purpose, a meaning of our existence here upon planet Earth, or anything like that. Interestingly, Richard Dawkins, maybe many of you have heard of him. He's very prominent over in England, and he's written all kinds of books, arguing against the existence of a personal sovereign creator God. He's probably one of the most popular proponents of Darwinian evolution during our lifetime. For those of us that are here, he wrote a book entitled The God Delusion. And in his book, he said that Darwin made it possible to be an, quote, intellectually fulfilled atheist. Now that we've had somebody like Charles Darwin, who brought forth his form of evolution, that's made it possible for us now to be intellectually atheistic. In other words, put it on an intellectual plane and everything. There is no personal sovereign creator God whatsoever. By contrast, there's a professor at Tufts University, Daniel Dennett is his name. He published a book entitled Darwin's Dangerous Idea. Darwin's Dangerous Idea. And this is what he said. He wrote that Darwinism is like, quote, a universal acid. You know, an acid can eat through things. He's saying Darwinism is like a universal acid. It eats through just about every traditional concept and leaves in its wake a revolutionized worldview. He's saying Darwinian evolution, like an acid, has eaten through just about every traditional statement or belief that man has had down through the ages of time. Like an acid that's just eaten through and destroyed all the traditional concepts of morality and ultimate meaning and purpose of life and all the rest. And it leaves us in its wake of a revolutionized worldview whatsoever. And because Darwinian evolution really became popular, particularly in the second half of the 1800s, and then spilled over the 1900s, and then came into so many of our colleges and universities, it has become the dominant viewpoint of those who don't really want to believe in a personal sovereign creator God at all. Now, there are some Christians who have developed what they call theistic evolution, that God has used evolution as his means of bringing about things in the world and all the rest. But this whole concept that has, between the different perversions of theology that came in through Satan's tactics into Protestantism, and then bringing Darwinian evolution on top of that, it has led people in the 20th century and now spilled over to our present century to come to the conclusion that there is no personal sovereign God who exists whatsoever. And that's the current belief that Satan is using now in his ultimate war against God, to just throw out the window that there is a personal sovereign creator God. It doesn't exist at all. As a result, in the 1960s, there was a God is Dead movement that hit North America and the United States, Canada, and over in Great Britain and other parts of Europe as well. The God is Dead movement. And some expressions of this. There was a philosopher theologian by the name of Paul Tillich, who was on the faculty of up in Massachusetts at everything, Harvard University. And Dr. Tillich was a philosopher, a theologizer, and all the rest. He would write books about theology and talk about God, etc. And in his classroom, one day one of the students raised his hand and said, Dr. Tillich, you keep talking about God, but we don't understand exactly what you mean by God. Would you give us your personal definition of God? This was his definition. God is the impersonal ground and source of all being. In other words, impersonal is not a divine being that is the ground and source of everything else that exists. God is the impersonal ground and source of all being. When he died, Time magazine, on the front cover, they had his picture, and they said that he was the greatest American theologian of the 20th century. And I heard another philosopher who attended the last public lecture that Paul Tillich delivered at Harvard University, and there were invitations sent out to philosophy professors from colleges and universities all around the world to attend it. And there was a gentleman who attended there. I heard him relate to us what happened. He said after Dr. Tillich completed his presentation, his lecture, he threw it open for questions. And one person said to him, Dr. Tillich, you've been theologizing, philosophizing about theology and everything else. Could you tell us, sir, what conclusion have you come to concerning ultimate meaning and purpose in life? And this gentleman said, Dr. Tillich, in response to that, stood there before the microphone, silent for a while. He walked back and forth across the platform in deep thought. When he finally came back to the microphone, he said, I have to confess to you, in spite of all my years of theologizing and philosophizing, I don't know if there is any ultimate purpose and meaning for our lives as human beings here upon planet Earth. So tragic, a brilliant mind that ends up with a big zero as far as ultimate meaning and purpose of our lives as human beings upon planet Earth today. And it's just kind of a offhanded expression of denial of the existence of a personal sovereign creator God of the Bible. When I was living out in the Chicago area a number of years ago, I turned on the radio one evening, and a philosophy professor from one of the large universities in the Chicagoland area was being interviewed. And he and the moderator were talking about the origin of things. And the moderator said, this professor, I take it then you don't believe that there is a personal sovereign creator God. And the philosopher said, oh, to the contrary, I believe there was such a God. And the moderator said, well, you put that in past tense. You mean to say that there was a God that existed in the past, but he no longer exists? Yes, that's what I believe. Well, if he existed in the past, he no longer exists, what happened to him? He said, well, you see, this God, way, way back, like an eternity past, decided to bring into existence a universe. And he figured out the way he would do it is through a Big Bang. He said, but the problem is, when he set off the Big Bang, he got too close to it, and the Big Bang killed him. He went out of existence while the universe came into existence. Just another expression, again, of denial of the existence of the personal sovereign creator God of the Bible. During the God is Dead movement, one of the major spokesmen for that here in America was a theology professor at a Methodist university in one of our southern states. And his name was Dr. Thomas Altizer. And he was one of the major ones on television, radio, and everything else saying there is no personal sovereign creator God. And what he said was this. He said that mankind is on the verge of almost ushering in a perfect utopian society here in the world. But he said there are certain things all of us as human beings must do in order to usher in this almost perfect society here upon planet Earth. The first thing that all of us must do is that every one of us as human beings must admit that the God of the Bible does not exist. There is no personal sovereign creator God whatsoever. It's not until all of us admit that we can usher in an almost perfect utopian society here upon planet Earth. And all this began in the 1960s with the God is Dead movement. And now this denial of God's existence has been sown long enough, at least in our Western culture and society, for our society to begin reaping the tragic harvest of this denial of the personal sovereign creator God of the universe. And we're going to have to go through some of these things rather quickly, but let me just draw your attention to some of the results that our society right now is experiencing as a result of this continuing denial of the existence of the personal sovereign creator God of the Bible. One result is a deep-seated attitude of despair on the part of a lot of people. You see, when God created mankind, God created human beings in such a way that they need to have a personal relationship with their Creator in order to understand ultimate reality and have ultimate meaning and purpose in life. But now that the existence of the Creator God of the universe has been denied to human beings, a lot of this being propagated in university classes and everything else to young people, there's been a deep-seated attitude of despair upon many people. In order for us to have ultimate meaning and purpose in life, God created us in such a way, the only way we can have that is through a personal relationship with Him, one-on-one. Each of us individually with our Creator, our true and the living God. And so one of the tragic results of this has been a deep-seated attitude of despair. And that's been true with a lot of our younger generations coming up, because they were growing up now with this denial of God's existence in their colleges, their universities. They get it in other means as well, through all different forms of electronic communication. And as a result, many of them have a deep-seated attitude of despair of thinking, well, is there any ultimate meaning and purpose for my existence? Why do I exist? Is there any really true meaning, purpose for my existence whatsoever? And as they find that they have a spiritual vacuum inside because the personal God has been denied to them, they try to fill that void with all different kinds of things. And so over the last several decades, we've had tremendous revivals of witchcraft in our society. Spiritism. Get a spiritist medium, hold a seance that can maybe bring some ultimate meaning and purpose into your life. Satan worship has been revived dramatically in the Western world over the last several decades. All different forms of the occult. Astrology is a major thing. Some people today feel they can't get through life even one day without reading their horoscope for the day to see what's going to happen to me today. And is there any true meaning and purpose in my life, in my existence today? Other people have turned to Oriental mysticism. You go to Asia and get yourself a guru, or you bring one here to North America who can maybe give you some insight into ultimate meaning and purpose of life. Others have turned to drugs. And I don't have to tell you the scourge of drugs in our Western society. And, I'm in my 70s, and I can tell you, when I was a teenager, and even in the early years of college, drugs was not the scourge that it is in our society right now. But a lot of our younger people, they just feel an empty vacuum inside. And so they try to fill that with drugs, and hoping that through drugs they might, through hallucination, get some insight into purpose in life. New Age concepts and everything. And the New Age philosophy is that we are moving in a direction of perfection here upon planet Earth. And some of them claim they have, I guess they think it's beings out in space that they call channelers, that they can communicate with. And some of them are claiming that these channelers are saying, there's one group of people upon planet Earth are holding you back from bringing in a perfect utopian society in the world, and that's these Bible-believing Christians that are in the world. And that they claim that some of them say to the New Agers, someday we're going to intervene and remove them instantly from the earth so that the rest of you can bring in the perfect new age, the perfect new society, which, by the way, is probably going to be the world's explanation when the church is raptured out of the world, disappears all of a sudden. Say, see, the channelers of the New Age, they've done just exactly that's probably one of the basic ways they'll be able to explain why all these thousands of people disappeared all of a sudden from planet Earth at the same time. So, a deep-seated attitude of despair. Here's another tragic consequence of this and not of God's existence. It's a denial of all moral absolutes. A denial of all moral absolutes. And we're having an incredible breakdown of morality within our society over the last several decades. Breakdown of all kinds of moral things. Free sex is kind of the accepted order today. Free sex. Attempts to redefine marriage. Attempts to abolish capital punishment for murderers. Propagation of pornography. Even child pornography now has been legalized. You can put out all these just cruel pictures of young children in an immoral way at everything of dealing with them. Attempts to abolish or redefine the family, and the tremendous scourge of abortion going on within our society. I don't know how much you read demographers. These are scholars that keep track of population levels and everything within society. But they are expressing right now that in order for a nation to maintain their regular line of descent, you have to have an average of 2.1 children born of every married couple to maintain your population in your nation or your society. Demographers now point out that all the nations of Western Europe have fallen way down below that 2.1. And they say they've gone so far down, there's no way they can reverse that now and continue maintaining their own society. And with the tremendous influx of Muslims into Western Europe since World War II, Muslim couples, the average Muslim woman is producing somewhere in the area of 7 to 8 children, while the European women, less than 2 children. And in Germany, they're saying we can't reverse this now. We're going to be overpopulated by the Muslims. Gaddafi, before he was bumped off a week or two ago, about 2 years ago, made this statement publicly. It looks like Allah is going to give us all of Europe within the next 20 to 50 years without firing one weapon. We're going to outborn them and just overrun them by that. Now they're claiming that America is slipping just slightly underneath that 2.1 number. The Russians are panicking. I've read articles in Russian newspapers where they're panicking because the Muslims are outpopulating the Russians, that Putin and the Russians have been giving all kind of financial incentives to Russian couples, produce more babies, produce more babies, produce more babies. And they're below the level now of really being able to reverse this whole trend going on. And in studies I've done by demographers, abortion is leading us right in the direction the Muslims want. Because in abortion, we are killing children who could be born in. And demographers are pointing out, not only is that playing in the hands of the Muslims here in North America, because they are outpopulating us now, who are not Muslims, but in addition, we're killing off the younger generation who, when the older people get older, you're not going to have enough young people to take jobs and be putting money into, Social Security and things like that. And we're not going to have enough to defend our nation as fighting men and all the rest. And so we are committing suicide through the whole abortion rate going on within our Western culture and society. Then you go on with all other kinds of breakdown of morality. And here's a line of reasoning that leads to this. Since there's no personal sovereign creator God around to tell us what is right and what is wrong morally, and to hold us responsible for what we do with our lives and our lifestyle, since there's no personal sovereign creator God around who has revealed to us moral absolute principles, then the only thing we can conclude is that the traditional moral principles that we've used for generations were purely man-made. And if the traditional moral absolutes were purely man-made, then man has a right to abolish those absolutes, discard them, or ignore them, whatever you want, and just live any way you want to. Old Testament scholars are pointing out that in the book of Proverbs particularly, God reveals the fact that when he created the universe, he created and established permanently within the universe a whole system of law. There's natural law, like the law of gravity, but there's also moral law that God has built into the universe, moral law within the universe. And these unchangeable moral systems that God has built into the universe, they are fixed. You can't change them. They are fixed. You cannot change them in any way at all, and they are inflexible moral principles built into the world system when God created the universe here upon planet Earth. And what they mean by inflexible is this: it doesn't matter who you are, what your status is in life or within society. If you challenge or break any of these fixed, unchangeable, inflexible orders that God has built into the universe, you're going to pay a high price for doing that. And, for example, with the fixed order of natural law, say the law of gravity, and it doesn't matter who you are, Even if you're a prominent ruler over a nation, if you decide to challenge the law of gravity, which is a fixed one, unchangeable and inflexible, and you decide to challenge that by going to the top of a 20-story building and jump off that roof, you can't change that. You're going to pay a price. You're going to jump to a conclusion in a hurry. And it's a death conclusion. That's a fixed, unchangeable order of moral law God built the universe, and you can't change it. You can't moderate it so that you can challenge it in different ways. If you challenge it, you'll pay a price. It's the same with the fixed order of moral law. And as I've been writing articles and everything for our Friends of Israel magazine, I did a whole series for a couple of years on the whole biblical concept that God is moral. Did all kind of research into all of the STDs, the sexually transmitted diseases that are spreading like wildfire between mankind today, particularly in the Western world. And many of them have been around for generations, like syphilis. But as I researched through secular sources, the most terrible one right now is the HIV virus, and you know what that leads to. What that leads to, a terrible, terrible disease that kills people, AIDS, kills them in a horrendous way. The first AIDS victim on record that was discovered was in 1980. It was over in Africa. But now it's spread to many other nations around the world. And within 20 years after 1980, there was something like 20 million people that already died of AIDS in the world. And your secular people who deal with these things in the medical field and all the rest say that if we can't put a stop to this, there's going to be like maybe 80 more million people die of AIDS within our society within the next 50 years here upon planet Earth. I had a veteran nurse who told me, she's a Christian, told me that when she was nursing, she was assigned to a young man, like in his early 20s, who had come down with AIDS, and was assigned to him until he died. She said his death was the most horrible thing in all my years of nursing I've ever worshipped or ever witnessed whatsoever. She was absolutely horrendous. In the last several days or weeks, every opening in his body was just pouring forth blood and things like that out of his ears, his nose, his mouth, his eyes, everywhere, all over. She's just horrendous to see this. But this is a part of the tragic resource or result of our rejecting the personal sovereign creator God of the Bible and the moral absolutes he lays down for mankind here upon planet Earth. It's a fixed, unchangeable, inflexible order. It doesn't matter who you are, you're going to pay a price for violating that and changing it. That's part of the tragic consequence of all moral absolutes being denied. By the way, Dr. Thomas Altizer, the God is dead theologian that said we can almost usher in a perfect utopian society when all of us deny the existence of a personal sovereign creator God of the Bible, he said there's a second thing that all of us have to do in order to usher in this almost perfect utopian society upon planet Earth, and that is all of us must reject all satanic morality. I'm using his exact words. But then he describes satanic morality as the morality that's taught in the Bible. The moral principles taught in the Bible are evil, they're satanic. And it's not until all of us rebel against the moral absolutes that are described in the Bible, not until then that we can have almost a perfect utopian society upon planet Earth. And he was a university professor, and these are the kind of concepts that are being poured into the minds of many of our youth in our universities today and colleges they're going to. There are no moral absolutes. So just do whatever you feel like doing, sexually and all other ways that involve moral principles whatsoever. Here's a third tragic consequence of this and not of God's existence. A denial of objective truth. A denial of objective truth that is binding upon all mankind. Again, a denial of objective truth that is binding upon all mankind. What do we mean by objective truth? By objective truth, we mean it is truth in and of itself, whether people recognize it or don't recognize it. It's there, objective truth. So whether you want to accept it, whether you recognize it, whether you want to abide by it or not, doesn't change it. It's objective. You can't change it. And so it's objective for all human beings, whether they recognize it or accept it whatsoever. And so how many times do you have people say, well, each individual determines what is truth for himself or herself. It's up to each one of us to determine. What's truth for me isn't necessarily truth for you. And so whatever you think is truth, that's up to you to have it, but don't try to enforce that on my concept of truth, because there is no objective truth, that's the same for all human beings here upon planet Earth. And so you often hear the statements that truth is relative or subjective. Truth is relative or subjective. There is no objective standard for right and wrong or truth. And that leads to a next tragic consequence. That's this: denial of an objective standard. Denial of an objective standard by which a person can evaluate whether something is right or wrong. Denial of an objective standard by which a person can evaluate whether there's something right or something wrong. And here again, you have people say, no person can legitimately tell another that what he or she has done is wrong. No one has the right to impose his or her concept of right or wrong upon another, because there is no objective standard by which to determine whether something is right or something is wrong. Let me give you one particular thing that drove this home to me. I'm going back to the mid-1970s when I was teaching at Philadelphia College of Bible. And one of the courses I had to teach was church history, and we come up to the present time at that time, and we're dealing with some of these issues going on. We had an older student in the classroom this one year, and he had been an administrator in one of the public school systems in New Jersey. He said, would you mind if I were to bring in to show to the class a sixth grade values clarification textbook that was used with sixth graders in this public school system? And I said, please bring it in. And he did. When I opened up the front cover, there in large pictures and words were three big symbols. One was the cross of Christianity. One was the swastika of Nazism. And the third one was the hammer and sickle of communism. And underneath those three symbols was the question, which of these is right? Which of these is right? In other words, which one of these and what it represents is right? And in the rest of the first half of the book, it drummed into the minds of the sixth graders, you can't say that what any one of these symbols represents is right, nor can you say that what any of these symbols represents is wrong, because there is no objective standard to determine whether, for example, Christianity or communism or Nazism is right or wrong. And then, right in the dead center of the book, 2 pages, in large letters, word-for-word quotation of the Ten Commandments out of the Bible. And then in the rest of the second half of the book, it said to the sixth graders, can you believe there are people so stupid and so ignorant as to believe there are moral absolutes like these expressed in the Ten Commandments from the Bible? He said the whole purpose of that course was to get the sixth graders thinking there is no objective standard of truth whatsoever. And so, therefore, you can't rightfully say that what this group is doing or what they believe is right, nor can you say that what they're doing or believe is wrong, because there is no objective standard to determine whether something is right or whether something is wrong. Then, here's another tragic consequence. It's going on in our society, the denial of God's existence. It's a whole new concept of tolerance within society. A whole new concept of tolerance within society. Let me explain the historic view of tolerance that mankind followed many centuries, but now the new concept of tolerance. The historic view of tolerance was this: people and groups of differing opinions and practices are to live together peaceably. That's been the historic view of tolerance. People and groups of differing opinions and practices are to live together peaceably. They have the right to believe that a contrary opinion or practice is wrong. They even have the right to openly express the belief that what this group or what this person believes or practices is wrong. You have the right to believe that. You have the right, free speech, to express you believe that what they do is wrong, but you do not have the right to threaten, terrorize, or physically harm those with whom you disagree. That's been the historic view. You can disagree with these people. You can publicly state you disagree with them and you think they're wrong and tell reasons why you think they're wrong, but you don't have a right to threaten them, terrorize them, or physically abuse them because you disagree with each other. That's how society functioned for many centuries. Here's the new view of tolerance now. The belief or open expression that an opinion or practice of a person or group is wrong amounts to a hate crime and should be punished by law. Again, the belief or open expression that an opinion or practice of a person or group is wrong amounts to a hate crime and should be punished by law. A couple of years ago, I was ministering at a Baptist church up in Waterloo, Ontario, Canada. And the Parliament of the province of Ontario, 2 or 3 years before that, had passed a hate crime bill, which said, if you claim, you state what this person or this group believes or practices is wrong, you're guilty of a hate crime, and the government will deal with you. Well, the pastor and his wife of that church told my wife and me of a situation that took place there in Ontario about 2 or 3 years ago. There was a very godly Christian young man who had a printing company. And one day there was a man came in, gave him an object and said, I'd like you to print so many copies of this. And the owner looked at that and he refused to print it. And the man said, why won't you print it? He said, because what you've asked me to print is very obscene. And I refuse to print obscene things to be distributed to other people. Well, the man that brought it in, enraged, he said, the only reason you're refusing to print this is because I'm gay. It's the only reason you're doing that. And the young man said, no, sir, you're wrong on that. He said, I could give you a list of names of gay people that I printed things for. It's not because of what you are, it's because of the nature of what you asked me to print. I said the things that they asked me to print were very, very fine, no problem whatsoever. Well, this man was so enraged, he took him to court to sue him. And whoever the officials were there in Ontario, they appointed a lesbian woman to be the judge, to sit in judgment upon this young man. And so when he and the man who took him to court appeared before the lesbian judge, she read the riot act to the Christian young man and said, you will print this for this man. And he said, I'm sorry, ma'am, but I will not. I refuse to. That's contrary to my personal convictions. She said, it doesn't matter what your personal convictions are. The law of this province orders you to print that for that man without any question. And she said, I'll see to it that the law will force you to print that. And she said, you have violated this man's rights by refusing to print that. The young man said, what about my rights? Listen to what she said. As a Christian in the province of Ontario, you have no rights. That was her statement. And that got into the news and stirred up quite a bit of controversy there in Ontario for a part of time. The young man still refused to print it. So what he did was he closed up his business and sold it to somebody else. He would not compromise his Christian conviction of morals to print something so obscene to be distributed to other people there in that part of Canada. Here's another result of this denial of God's existence is a view of religious pluralism, a view of religious pluralism. It's the idea that somehow we have to bring everybody to agree that all gods, all religions, and all ways must be accepted as equal. And all attempts to convert people from one religion to another should be stopped. And that exclusive claims of only one true God, one true religion, one way, are a divisive form of bigotry. Divisive form of bigotry. When the world was coming up to the year 2000, the new millennium, at the United Nations in 2000, the largest gathering of leaders of all the religions of the world in all of history gathered together there. And they had a conference there. And the man who started CNN was one of the main men behind that. A very wealthy man up in Canada that is regarded as the wealthiest man in all the world put up huge sums of money for this as well. There have never been so many different religions before in all of history represented there. And the whole purpose of it was to figure out how can religion play a role in bringing about peace here upon planet Earth in the new millennium. But one of the emphasis there was we must come to the point where all religions must be accepted as true. And that anybody who says ours is the only true religion, they're going to be guilty of a hate crime. And so that's the way things are moving along those particular lines. Here's another one. There's a tendency to deify mankind. Again, Dr. Thomas Altizer said, in order to have our perfect utopian society, number one, we must all admit that the personal sovereign God of the Bible is dead. He does not exist. Number two, we must reject all that evil satanic morality that's taught in the Bible. And number three, we must all acclaim ourselves the great humanity divine. In other words, we're all moving in the direction of divinity. It's not until all of us, as mankind, adopt those three outlooks that we can have a perfect utopian society, almost, here upon planet Earth. And at the same time that they're trying to deify man, they're trying to humanize Jesus Christ. And some of the so-called lost gospels come out, recently that portrays Jesus, that he fathered a child, through a woman in France or something like that. And they're trying to totally humanize Jesus Christ and say he's not a divine being incarnated in human flesh. And there's a German professor at a university in Germany right now, and ironically, his field of teaching is early Christianity. But he's written a lot of books, and he denies that the scriptures have a divine source. The Bible's totally man-made. He totally denies the virgin birth of Christ. He says that Jesus probably was born as a result of his mother being raped by some man. He denies the substitutionary atonement of Jesus Christ. Jesus didn't die to pay for the sins of people here upon planet Earth. He denied the bodily resurrection of Jesus Christ. He said Jesus decayed, his body somewhere decayed here in the ground. He totally denies a second coming of the Lord Jesus back to planet Earth. And let me read to you one of the statements. When I read this set a chill through me, that he published this in one of his books. He said, with the last of my strength, I pushed God himself down into the mire and at last became free. So I prefer from now on to develop a purely human view of religion without having to legitimate myself by a higher authority, which theologians call God. In other words, he said, as far as I'm concerned, I killed God, so that I don't have to be accountable to some God out there whatsoever. And there are many other examples of this and all the rest. The professor that deals with ethics at Princeton University is an avowed atheist. And he says that every kind of sexual relationship, there's nothing wrong with it at all, as long as you have consenting partners with each other. He was asked, do you see anything wrong if a couple produce babies solely for the purpose of selling their parts, to people who need a new heart or new kidney or something like that, almost like a mass production of new hearts and kidneys and all the rest? Is there anything morally wrong with giving forth the children for that purpose, letting them be born, and then take all their parts out of their inside and sell them to people? Nothing morally wrong with that at all, from this man's perspective. And he's been classified as the man who's making the greatest impact right now on the moral concepts of society in the world today. Professor at Princeton University. And on and on and on it goes. But we have to take our 10-minute break, because we have to, in the next hour, start getting into what the Bible says about the future.
Thanks, Renny. Isn't it amazing with the moral relativism is the whole idea of moral relativity wouldn't work in any discipline of any kind, anywhere, for any reason. Yet when it comes to ultimate reality, somehow it's supposed to make sense.
Yeah.
And I also find that it's kind of a buzzword now. It's maybe curbing off a little bit, but you've heard this word a lot from young people. It's a very popular word, is the word random.
Yeah.
You're hearing that word, random. They live in a random world, and things are random.